Michael Jackson sat down on Johnny Carson's couch expecting the usual questions: music, fame, touring, the rumors that followed him everywhere. Johnny was warm at first, joking the way he always did, letting the audience relax into the moment. Then, in the middle of the interview, Johnny asked something no one expected: how Michael wanted his last breath to look. The studio went quiet, because Michael didn't give a celebrity answer. It was a late-night broadcast in the late 1980s in Burbank, California, the kind of studio where everything looked effortless on camera but ran like a machine behind it. Bright lights, polished floor, cue cards, stagehands moving like shadows. The band hit their stings perfectly. The applause sign flickered on and off like it controlled the room's heartbeat. Backstage, Michael had been quiet. Not nervous exactly. He'd done bigger stages than this, but talk shows were a different kind of exposure. On stage, he could hide inside the choreography, the rhythm, the roar of a crowd. On a couch, under studio lights, you couldn't moonwalk your way out of a question. He had arrived through a side entrance to avoid turning the lobby into a stampede. A few staffers still peeked around corners anyway, then pretended they hadn't. Even the interns moved differently, like the building had suddenly become a museum and they were afraid to knock something over. Michael's handler whispered reminders about the rundown. A short intro, a few light questions, a clip, a quick joke, a musical mention, then out. Safe, smooth, forgettable in the best way. Michael nodded, but he wasn't reading the cards. He was listening to the room. He could hear the audience before he saw them. Muffled laughter, the scrape of seats, the low buzz that always came right before the red light turned on. A studio audience isn't a stadium crowd, but it has its own pressure. In a stadium, emotion becomes a wave. In a studio, emotion becomes a spotlight. When Johnny greeted him, the audience exploded. Michael smiled politely, waved, and took his seat. The couch looked too casual for the weight of the moment, like someone had placed a living room in the middle of a controlled storm. The first few minutes were familiar territory. Johnny asked about music, rehearsals, how he handled pressure. Michael answered gently, careful, sometimes funny in that shy way he had when he felt safe. The crowd laughed when Johnny teased him about how loud fans could get. Michael smiled and said something light about earplugs, about how sometimes the screaming was louder than the band. The band hit a little riff. Everyone exhaled. Johnny leaned in, grinning. So you're telling me you've considered putting earplugs on your merchandise table? Michael laughed, small, genuine. Maybe, he said, but then the fans would just scream louder to prove they don't need them. The audience loved that. It was the easy, charming Michael people expected. Then Johnny leaned back, fingers resting on his cue cards, and his tone shifted, still friendly, but more serious. You know, Johnny said, you've been in front of more people than most humans will ever see in one lifetime. Michael nodded, eyes steady. And I've interviewed a lot of famous folks, Johnny continued. But there's something about you. People don't just watch you. They feel like they know you. Michael's smile faded a little, replaced by something thoughtful. The band stayed quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to move slower, like they didn't want to interrupt the mood. Johnny hesitated, just enough that the audience sensed something different was coming. Michael, he said, can I ask you a strange question? Michael nodded slowly. Sure. Johnny held up the cards as if to blame them. If you could choose it, Johnny said, how would you want to go? How would you want your last moment to be? The studio reacted immediately. A few nervous laughs, a surprised murmur. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." Even the band went still. Michael didn't laugh. He didn't deflect. He didn't do the polished thing celebrities do where they turn it into a joke and move on. He just looked down at his hands for a moment, like he was checking if he was allowed to answer honestly on television. The silence stretched. Johnny, to his credit, didn't rush him. He didn't try to soften it with humor. He waited the way good hosts do when they can feel the room holding its breath. Michael finally looked up, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried. I think, he said slowly, I'd want it to be peaceful. That sounded simple, but the way he said it made it heavy, like peaceful was something he'd spent his whole life trying to find. Johnny nodded gently. Peaceful, he repeated. What does that look like to you? Michael's eyes stayed focused, but his expression softened in a way that felt almost private. I wouldn't want, he paused, swallowing, I wouldn't want a lot of noise. A ripple moved through the audience, not laughter this time. Recognition. Michael continued. I've had so much noise, he said. Crowds, cameras, opinions, people talking around me, about me, for me. He shook his head once, small. So I think, he said, I'd want it quiet. Johnny's voice dropped a little. Quiet where? Michael's answer came out almost like a confession. At home, he said. That word, home, hit the room like a bell. Johnny leaned forward slightly, careful. And who would you want there? He asked. Michael didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the audience for a second, rows of strangers sitting in darkness, and then he said something that made the studio feel smaller. I'd want my mother there, he said. The crowd softened. You could hear someone sniffle. And my brothers, Michael added, if they wanted to be there. He smiled faintly at that, like he knew family was complicated but still sacred. Then he said the line that changed the whole interview. And I'd want children laughing in another room. A hush fell so deep it was almost unreal for live television. Even Johnny blinked, caught off guard in the most human way. Children laughing, he repeated quietly. Michael nodded. Not because it's a big scene, he said, but because I didn't get that. His voice stayed steady, but there was a tremor underneath it, like the truth was pressing against his ribs. I didn't get normal, he said. I didn't get being small and safe and just living. He took a breath, and you could see him choosing his next words carefully, like he didn't want to sound like he was asking for pity. So, if I could choose, he said, I'd want to hear that. Not screaming, not applause, just kids being kids. The audience stayed silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of people realizing they'd been wrong about what a superstar needs. Johnny's voice softened further. Do you think you'll ever get that kind of quiet? Michael looked down again, then back up. I try, he said. I try in little ways. He gave a small smile. Sometimes I sit somewhere and I listen for things that are real, he said. A bird, a fountain, a kid laughing, something that doesn't want anything from me. That sentence hit people hard because it was so plain. Fame makes everyone want something from you. Even admiration is a kind of wanting. Michael was describing a world where he could exist without being consumed. Then Michael added, almost as if he was answering an older question Johnny hadn't asked, and I'd want to feel like I did enough. Johnny nodded. Enough? Michael looked straight ahead. Enough good, he said. Enough love. He paused. Enough to make it worth it. That sentence landed like a weight in every seat, because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tragic. It was a man admitting that all the lights in the world don't automatically make a life feel complete. Johnny cleared his throat quietly, buying time for the room to breathe again. Michael, he said, people would hear you say that and think you're sad. Michael gave a small, honest smile. Sometimes I am, he said, but I'm also grateful. He looked out toward the audience again. I'm grateful people listen, he said, because if people listen, then maybe they'll listen to each other too. There was a beat where Johnny looked like he wanted to make a joke, because that's what he did. He rescued tension with humor. But he didn't. He let the sincerity stand. Instead, he asked carefully, what do you think people misunderstand about you? Michael didn't answer with a complaint. He answered with something almost gentle. They think I'm always strong, he said, but I'm just always trying. That was it. No explanation, no defense, just the truth. Johnny nodded slowly. That might be the most human thing anyone said on this show in a long time. The audience let out a soft laugh, relief, admiration, and emotion mixed together. Johnny then did something rare for him. He didn't pivot quickly to a joke. He didn't change the subject to keep things light. He simply said, "Thank you for answering that." Michael nodded once. Thank you for asking. When they went to commercial, the applause sign lit up, but the audience didn't clap like normal. They clapped like they were trying to hold something fragile without breaking it. Backstage afterward, one of the stage managers quietly told a producer, "That wasn't an interview. That was a moment." In the hallway, a makeup artist who had worked on hundreds of celebrities wiped her eyes and said, "He just wants peace." Even some of the crew, men who prided themselves on being unshakable, stood a little quieter as Michael walked by, like they didn't want to turn him back into a spectacle too quickly. Michael left the studio the way he entered, quiet, polite, almost small under all that attention. Outside, fans were waiting behind barriers, and he waved once, gently, before getting into the car. The city lights reflected in the window as the car pulled away, and for a second, he looked like someone watching his own life from a distance. But the people who were there that night didn't remember the jokes. They remembered the answer. Not because it was sad in a dramatic way, because it was sad in a human way. And somehow, that made him feel bigger than fame. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that even the brightest lives still crave simple peace. Have you ever heard someone say something so honest it changed how you saw them? Tell us in the comments and hit the notification bell for more untold documentary-style stories from the world of music.